The greasy man with the delicate fingers got down on his hands and knees in his hovel, down as far as he could go, with his forehead actually pressed against the floor in a sticky patch that snagged his stringy hair between the broken tiles. He did what he did every morning. He prayed for someone to die. But would it even matter? Was there anyone around who still advertised his special expertise in the darkness? It had been so long now, over a year since he'd been banned from working, and the greasy man with the delicate fingers owed money to every shop along the street where he lived. They started shaking their heads no as soon as they saw him coming, and in order to get bread, he had to go to the other side of town and parcel out precious bits from his dwindling savings to buy candy and gum until he could establish credit and come home with a loaf under his arm. It was an insult. It was murder to his pride and his sense of craft. But there was nothing he could do but appeal to his maker for justice and hope he would be revenged. There was nothing he could do but hope for a miracle. So he lay there with his face pressed against the floor and he prayed. Today, however, after 10 minutes of uninterrupted invocation, something happened. There was an unfamiliar noise. He heard the rattle of an engine on the street. The greasy man with the delicate fingers stopped muttering his pleas and curses, and he opened his eyes. He raised his head up and looked at his front door. He looked over at the plaster death mask of his wife. She was still so beautiful. She shamed him. The greasy man with the delicate hands had never been handsome, but he was now wrinkled, gaunt, and toothless. Would she still know him when it was his turn to stand before his maker and take judgment? Would she stay the hand of God against him, or would she laugh the way she used to, lilting, teasing, and turn away back to her heaven? The death mask hung on the wall, and the serene smile on his wife's face mocked him for his age and poverty. "It is not a miracle," said the man, lowering his head again. "It is someone in a car to see the woman next door with the 15 kids. No one for me." But when the man heard footsteps on the walkway, he got to his feet and brushed grit from his chest and leg hair. He stared at the death mask, now angry and confused. "It is a person who wants to sell magazines," said the man, reaching out to touch the stilly visage. The knocking came. The man shrunk back, cowering in one corner of his cluttered, reeking den. The knocking came again. The man rushed forward to the door and stared at it, breathing heavily. After the third knock, he reached out, and he threw the door open. Standing on his stoop were two women in black pantsuits, tight ponytails, and stern expressions. There was a 10-year age difference between them, and the older one wore makeup, whereas the younger one went plain. Otherwise, they could have been twins. Neither was beautiful or out of the ordinary or anything story like that, but both wore diamond necklaces and flashing blue earrings. The two women looked at each other, then back at the greasy man, who was wearing only brown underpants, from which his spindly legs protruded like the drones of a bagpipe. "Are you Ugo Pavarelli?" asked the older woman. Yes, said Ugo. "For God's sake, tell me what you want." "We are the Pollywells," said the woman, "Frida and Francine." "I'm Frida," said the younger woman. "And I'm Francine," said the older. Yes, said Ugo. "I don't know you. Why are you here?" The two women looked at each other once again. "Our brother is dead," said Francine. Ugo shook his head and hung his face low. "I have been banned from working," he said. "He was the youngest of the three of us," said Frida. "Our father loved him the best. Our father is devastated. He will not speak. He will not sleep. He sits in his recliner with a blank face, and he stares straight ahead, and he will not listen to a thing we say. You have to help him. You have to come with us." She stepped forward as if she were going to drag Ugo away by force. "Our father has gone mad," said Francine, narrowing her eyes and putting her hand on her younger sister's arm, restraining her. "And they say you can bring him back to sanity." "Who says?" said Ugo. "You would have to bribe everyone in this city to let me practice my craft again." "Money is not an issue here," said Francine. "Name your price, and we will meet it." Ugo reached out from the darkness and held up his hands, shaking them in the Pollywells' faces. "Can't you see?" said Ugo. "Can't you see that I am finished?" Frida and Francine drew closer until Ugo dropped his fingers. "You'll have everything you need," said Francine. "We will wait while you dress," said Frida. "We must leave immediately. His body was moved from the coroner to the funeral home this morning, and the funeral is scheduled for tonight. I fear Father might hurt himself if we cannot reach him at the funeral." "You insult me when you assume that I do not understand the stakes," said Ugo. Frida and Francine looked at one another. "Anyway, we have to hurry," said Frida, and Ugo turned back inside his house. Ugo sat between the Pollywell sisters in the backseat of their long sedan. The driver picked his way through the city without seeming to rush, but avoided both traffic congestion and long lights with last-minute turns down hidden streets, keeping their pace swift and sure. "How did your brother die?" said Ugo. He had changed into a black corduroy suit and a wide-brimmed floppy hat that came down low over his eyes. "It was suicide," said Francine, "but Father doesn't know." "He thinks it was an accident," said Frida. "And we aren't going to tell him any differently," said Francine. Yes, but how did he do it? Gun? Wrists? Pills? "He died in his Renault," said Francine. "He filled the garage with fumes, and he died in his sleep." "So the corpse is intact," said Ugo. "The canvas is pristine." "We told Father that Junior had an undiagnosed heart condition. We were going to tell him the truth, but then we saw how he took the initial news, and we couldn't bear to hurt him further. Not that it matters much now. Father's practically catatonic. I think he knows we lied. Junior was in perfect health." "He died by his breath," said Ugo, "and I shall use my famous breathing technique for the funeral." "What is your famous breathing technique?" asked Francine. The car came to a stop, and the driver set the brake. "We're here," said the driver. The sedan was parked in front of a long, sloping green lawn that led up to a clean, white, one-story building with a drooping porch held up by 5 Doric columns. There were cubes of shrubbery along the path to the building's front door, and mildew was starting to creep up the sides of the column like handprints. "Tell me why your brother killed himself," said Ugo. "The truth of it." "He was in love," Francine began. "He thought he was in love," said Frida, "with a very nice young man who wanted nothing to do with him." "Nice," said Francine. "Yes," said Frida. "Imagine if he'd let him on and Junior had given him money. That would have been worse." "Worse than Junior being dead," said Francine. "Junior made a choice," said Frida. "Anyway, he thought he was in love, and he couldn't buy his way into his object's heart, and so he decided life wasn't worth living anymore." "Junior was always hasty and dramatic," said Francine. "Junior was always utterly stupid," said Frida. "Anyway, now he's dead," said Francine. Ugo reached across Francine's lap and opened the door. He crawled out over her with a nimble contortion of his attenuated frame. He left the door open behind him, and he walked up the path to the funeral home, hands behind his back. Eyes half closed, hat slung low. "We'll be back for the funeral at 6, shouted Francine. "It will be very small, just family." Ugo did not turn around, and the car drove on. The body of Franklin Pollywell Jr. lay on a cold slab between 7 sloping valleculae that drained his fluids. The funeral director stood in one corner and watched every move that Ugo made. "They paid me $10,000 to do nothing, on top of my fees," said the mortician, a man named Colchester. "I'm supposed to help you do whatever you want." "I need you to go to the hardware store for me," said Ugo. "I have a list of things for you to buy, and you must buy them immediately with absolutely no substitutions. If you can't find something on the list, then you'll need to go to a different hardware store until you've got everything." "Can you imagine that?" said Colchester. "Not even allowed to touch the body in my own funeral home. What kind of deal did I make?" "Don't you know who I am?" said Ugo. His eyes flashed, and he sized Colchester up. A weak man, and a poor artist. He could be intimidated. Ugo needed help, and he was the only one around. "Sure, I know who you are," said Colchester. "There are legends about you.